I am Kelly Carlin-McCall. I am your hostess with the mostess. Welcome to my new podcast, Humans on the Verge. A little about me. I was born in 1963 to two parents who were young, creative, rebellious, and very, very curious about the world and their inner lives. As the times were what they were, my parents pursued that exploration of their inner world through a couple of different means. Sometimes drugs, sometimes some therapeutic paths, and sometimes spiritual practices. You know, the times they were a-changin', and my parents were ever evolving. And it seemed as I made my way into my adulthood, I became a seeker too. My whole life, I've always felt like I'm on the verge of the next version of myself, the verge of a creative breakthrough, the verge of some new insight about myself or what it means to be a human being. Having been alive for the last 6 decades, it is also clear that humans have been on the verge also. I was born into a world on the verge. In the 1960s, we humans, here in America at least, moved from the uptight 1950s where, traditional stuff like going to church, women being homemakers, keeping up with the Joneses were the center of our lives. And what we awoke to was the counterculture, where individual expression exploded in the arts and pop culture. The human rights of everyone became front and center. And we went to the moon, where we could now view our human life from a different perspective. We began to see that there were no lines or boundaries between all of us, and we also began to worry about how we humans might be fucking up the state of the planet as a whole. I have taken many forks in my life path: solo show performer, writer of TV, film, and memoir. I have a master's in Jungian psychology. I have studied and practiced Zen Buddhism for over 25 years. I got certified as a life coach. And after my dad died, began taking care of his legacy in many different ways. And in 2018, I founded a community, an online community called Humans on the Verge, where I guide, mentor, teach, and hold space for a group of people who are wanting to look within themselves to understand what makes them tick. Go deep, I like to say, so that they can live into a more authentic version of their life, or take a leap. But all these forks in my life have seemed to have woven themselves together into one strand. My natural curiosity about what makes people tick, what makes people change, and what makes society and the culture evolve. I'm interested in what essentially makes us human. How do we grapple with this strange and miraculous opportunity to be conscious, sentient beings in these perilous and exciting times we find ourselves in? This podcast is a chance for me and you to explore all of that by talking to people who think a lot about how culture and humans change, evolve, move from one stage of life to the next, or one state of mind to another. I'll be talking to folks from the world of spirituality, psychology, philosophy, politics, science, the arts, and entertainment too. The first episode of the month will be me in conversation with someone that I know or I've sought out to talk about being a human on the verge. I'm interested in talking to them about how they've been maybe on the verge themselves in some time of their life. Maybe they're living into some sort of awakening or realignment with something truer within themselves. Maybe what they've been shedding or claiming. I'm also interested in how their work in the world pertains to exploring or working with others around the edges of change or consciousness. In other words, new ways of seeing and being and doing. Also, how they see these current times for humanity as a whole. Might we be stepping towards something new, or are we still learning the same old lessons? And finally, I really want to know, how are they personally coping with and seeing a way forward through these what seem very complicated times? The second podcast of the month will be just me talking directly to you, unpacking the topic from the earlier episode. I'll look at it through the lens of my life, my wrangling my wrangling with that issue or worldview, and how I approach my work in supporting others who also are wrangling with that. And then, of course, I'd love to offer to you, the listener, some ideas, maybe some questions or some things to ponder and meditate on, in case you're grappling with this topic too. I'm excited you're here. Hell, I'm excited I'm here. I've missed this space, the podcast space in my life the last 5 years. I'm glad to be back. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to my monologue show of the month, or as I like to call it, Ponderama, my space to ponder deeply about the things that we're talking about this month. If you haven't already listened to my interview and conversation with Genpo Roshi, feel free to do so now or later, whatever floats your boat. But today I'm going to talk about a few things that he and I unpacked. And the setup for these monologue shows really are for me to investigate how I grapple with these topics, what I've learned about them through my own life, how I present them or offer guidance to people who are grappling with them. And then I've got a couple of things to offer to you also. So let's jump in. So Genpo and I talked about two major things, one of which was the path of his version of how he practices Zen Buddhism. He is a Zen master. And inside of that, we unpacked these two kind of main states of being, the dual and non-dual thinking. And there's this extra part that Genpo works on with people, which most Zen masters do not. In fact, I'd say all Zen masters except for him. Maybe there's a few other ones, which is the shadow part of the personality. And the shadow really is just the part of ourselves, our personality, traits, emotions, ways of seeing that we judge, we have some disapproval about. Actually, the society most likely has a disapproval about it. And so we tend to hide those parts of ourselves or downplay them or even are just completely unconscious of them. Totally normal thing to do. But I remember being in my 30s and this is my early 30s. I had just left my first husband. If you've read my memoir, A Carlin Home Companion, you'll remember him. And it was a shit show. And I remember being at my therapist, who I had met because of my husband's rehab, and she was kind of an expert on family dynamics and codependency and all this stuff. And I was knee-deep in all of that. So knee-deep that I didn't even know that I was more of a wreck than he was in some ways. But she began to talk to me about this idea of the shadow. And I just remember thinking, well, I don't have a shadow. I'm perfect. I'm the golden child. And I just laugh so hard now at that because it was just really my self-perception of myself. Like, oh no, I've got nothing wrong with me. It's everyone else that is fucked up. My parents are fucked up because they were, crazy, chaotic 60s parents, and certainly my ex-husband, he's really the problem. He too is a chaotic drug addict. Gee, funny how you pick these things. And that's kind of what she was saying to me. It's like you ended up picking kind of a repeat of your parents' life. Like, clearly you're not you're not present completely to yourself, Kelly. So I think back on that and I just always laugh how I'm like, oh, moi, shadow? No, sorry. But I ended up studying Jungian psychology, and really Carl Jung was the person who brought this idea forward of the shadow. These parts of ourselves that are not okay with society. They are the parts of us that are ugly at times. And so what Genpo does is he does this process, and I do this process too. He actually taught me how to do this process. He uses this really cool technique called voice dialogue. You can look it up. And he helps us speak through the voice of the shadow, different voices. And there are a few that he's always springing something on us when we do this work with him. But there's a couple in particular that when I think about the state of the world right now, that people tend to project onto other people. Well, first of all, I just want to say, these days, social media is a shadow projection machine. I just want to say that like what we do is we go on media, whether it's mainstream media or social media, and we are just flinging the evil of the world onto everyone else, whether it doesn't matter what side you're on. Notice the conversation on each side. It's pretty much the same. We're all deplorable in some way. So the deplorable parts of ourselves are the parts that are our shadow parts. And I think about in my own life, having to come to grips with some of my own personal shadow, one of which was my ambition. I was raised by counterculture people who, counterculture, it's all about lifting up those who are oppressed by society, hating the status quo, hating capitalism, seeing the greed and the corruption of capitalism. And so one of the things that I've learned to sit with and examine in a deep way are my own shadows around these things. So my own aspect of the parts of me that are ambitious, the parts of me that are greedy or selfish or needy. These are not comfortable things to feel into, to look at, to see. But the more we can do that, the more we have a conscious relationship with these aspects. Because here's the deal. In Buddhism, we have this idea, it's called the 10,000 voices, the 10,000 parts. We are all the parts of everything. That's how we see it through Buddhist eyes, including the greed, the ambitious, the needy, whatever it is. We don't reject anything. We try to sit with all of it. And when we do sit with it, something really interesting happens, which is it naturally evolves into a more healthy version of itself. Because if you think about greed is I want for me. And if you think about the survival instinct of anything, you have to have a piece of that in you. You have to be able to want and want and want to get yourself to stay alive. If we didn't have a deep desire or a wanting, which can look like greed in its most unhealthy way, but if we didn't have a desire for anything, we would have never gotten out of the cave. We would have just laid there like an amoeba and just been like, okay, whatever is good is good. All right, I don't need anything. And, 21 days later, we'd be dead or however fast, right? But we need water, we need food, we need air, we need companionship, we need to make babies, we need, I'm talking basic human needs. But if you know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the minute you get your survival needs made, boom, you level up to a different level of needs. Getting your emotional needs met, your social needs met, on and on and on, all the way up into the highest needs of self-actualization. So greed may look ugly in its most shadowy, insidious, I think of Lord of the Rings with Gollum, right? In the ring. Like that's the most insidious, shadowy version of greed. But what about desire? What about the desire to pursue your artistic dreams or your desire to make a difference in the world or your desire to have anything? It's okay. But it's okay if we're having a conscious relationship with it. This ambition thing for me has been something I've been unpacking the last couple of years because I've always felt very driven to be somebody, to have a label, to make a dent in the world. And I know that that came from my own personal shadow of growing up literally, and I'm going to say that word as I mean it, in the shadow of my dad. I was backstage growing up. I was not in the quote unquote light like my dad was on stage. I was in the dark part of the theater, watching the magic of what happens when you step into the light and when you pursue your ambition. My dad was a very ambitious artist. I mean, look at his career, 5 decades, something like that. Always evolving, always hungry for the next thing, never satisfied. So growing up in that shadow as a creative, I mean, I'm a creative being too. But for years, I kind of always just put that creative urge, I would dance around it, I would play with it, and then I would put it back in the basement. I would put it back in the shadow because my dad was alive and he was taking up so much room in the light. And then when my dad died, it was such a difficult time as a daughter because I lost my father and my mom was already dead. But the part of me that was an artist and a creative was actually excited because I knew I would get to step out of the shadow finally and into the light. And even telling you guys about that desire I had, that level of a little bit of excitement, no, a lot of excitement that there was room on the planet now for my creative self. It's awkward for me. It feels like something I shouldn't be saying out loud. And that's why I put it in the shadow, right? It's like, oh, I'm kind of admitting a little bit of part of my humanity that isn't perfectly shiny and zen and, the most, wonderful, evolved human being. Damn it, I was hungry to express myself. And I'd always felt like I didn't have full permission to do that. And so this ambition that I suddenly felt, this hunger for it, was a lot for me to deal with right after my dad died. But I was lucky I had people around me. I worked with people like Genpo Roshi, worked in my shadow, but also had mentors who, saw me as an individual and said, well, of course you feel that way. You're a creative, you're an artist, you want to do these things. So having to come to terms with a healthy version of ambition has been a really great thing for me because I can see that part of that ambition isn't just some selfish, look at me, look at me. I mean, definitely there's a part of that. And you ask anybody who's in the creative arts, who's a performer, there is some part of us that is like, yeah, look at me. Because we didn't get a lot of that at some point in our life. And yet there's also this other part that happens when we follow our ambition, and I call it healthy ambition. Most of the time that more in the light ambition, when we start to own that part of ourselves, that ambition wants to include others too. For me, as a writer or a performer or anything I do, even when I was executive producing the documentary we did a couple years ago with Judd Apatow about my dad, there's always some part of me that wants the audience to be included, to see themselves in the process. It's so important. There's that conversation that artists want to have, which is, part of it is, hey, look at me and look at us. Look at us humans. look at what we struggle with. For me, it comes in the form of my life, my ideas, my paths. But there's this universal element to it all where we can all see each other and relate. And so that ambition, I believe, is actually in the end a healthy thing, because people who have changed the world have been really ambitious. They've been kind of almost obsessed with whatever they're obsessed with. And yeah, not so good when the ambition wants to run over other people or disregard, people's lives, feelings, ability to survive on their own. There's that kind of rampant egomaniac kind of version of ambition. I think we're familiar with that these days a little bit. But really, when you think about everyone who changed the course of history, they did it because they had something inside of them that wouldn't leave them alone, and they had to honor it. They had to go find the edge of themselves and push towards it. And so, having dealt with all of this, my own ambition, my own shadow, my own light, and oh boy, I could talk about this for hours, and I probably will someday because I'm hopefully going to write a solo show about it. But one way I've been able to channel my understanding with all of this stuff is through working with other people who don't know how to claim their own healthy ambition. They don't know how to claim that what they really desire is okay to desire and to pursue. I think because for so many decades, I felt like I didn't know how to pursue my creative desires or that thing that wanted to express itself through me, and really grappled with it. And then I came to another side of it. I think for me, it's just this incredible opportunity I get to just shine a light for other people, that they get to do this too. And that part of the meaning of life, this is deeply what I believe, having studied, Jungian psychology and people like Joseph Campbell and even the Buddhist path that I lead, is that there's something bigger that we're serving here. There is some part of us that is bigger than just our own personal ambition, our own personal desire to create or express. I don't know what word you give it. In Jungian world, in the archetypal imaginal psychology world, we call it soul. And it's not the kind of soul of like the Christians where this, that kind of thing. It's this essential part of you that is both a reflection of your personality, but also a reflection of something bigger than us, something in the collective psyche. And one of my biggest joys is seeing people tap into that, to honor that thing that wants to express through them, and watch them learn how to move beyond the barriers that keep them from that expression. And my work with Genpo, when I started doing Genpo's work, it really was amazing, because his technique of moving you from kind of this dualistic world, working with these shadows, getting to be in relationship with them in a room with lots of other people. Like, we all go to the voice of greed, or we all go to the voice of murderous rage or insanity, or the psychological deviant. We've done a lot of crazy voices, but when you bring them up and you feel the energy, because in the end, it's all just energy, you are freed and have access to more of yourself. And in a way that's not like going back and doing family dynamic therapy and stuff like that. It's just like instantly opens things up. And then he steps you into the non-dual, this big place that everybody who's started meditating or drops acid these days or eats shrooms or whatever it is, that state we try to get to where we are at one with everything. When we use Genpo's technique of the voice dialogue to get there, and it's pretty fun. It's fun to do, and it's fun to lead people there. But when we get to be in this space of the non-dual, where there's no thinking mind, and there's just space. And then we connect to what we call big heart. So we go from big mind to big heart. And big heart is, there's no thinking mind. There's just deep love, abiding love and connection to each other. We see that as humanity, these non-dual states, these ability to be at one with thing and to see our oneness with everything is humanity's biggest shadow trait. Follow me here. We walk around all day, good, bad, good, evil, more successful, less successful, more creative, less creative, the hierarchies of life, have and have-nots, all those dualistic ways. But the one way we don't feel or see is this: we are actually all just one. We are one body. We are one energy. And what's so interesting about this is, people call that stuff woo-woo. I get it. Skeptics, especially, that's their job. People who want it to find the science behind this, they're working on it. People are working on it. But when you're in it, when you have a moment like that, people call them peak experiences. You have them all the time in nature. There's a whole guy who wrote a whole book about this called Awe, And when we're in that state, though, it's as real as anything. It's as real as the chair I'm sitting on. It's not some idea. It's not some fantasy. It's a truly real experience you're having. And so these times we live in are really, really in need of more of us being able to go to that space, that non-dual space, where we are able to see everyone as one and to see ourselves in everyone. So from like the most progressive person to understand that their inner MAGA is alive and well and actually really, really suppressed, especially if all they do all along on social media is talk about how much they hate MAGAs. And that the people in the MAGA movement who call us echo chamber snowflakes, that they really are that too. And they're just projecting that onto us. And so shadow work is so important these days. And there's lots of ways to go about it. Google shadow work, plenty of books on it, plenty of, study Carl Jung, whatever you want. But the way I like to deal with it with people is I do two different things. I do the voice dialogue work like Genpo does with my community, Humans on the Verge. I have a community called Humans on the Verge where I do coaching and things like that and teach courses. And one of the other things specifically, so we do lots of different shadow work there. But one of the things we also do there is we work on something called the inner critic. And the inner critic, many of you and all of you know, because we all have one. And it's not always in the shadow. It's the thing that tells us we're wrong, we're not worthy, we're pieces of shit, we'll never get there. Other people get to have that. We don't get to have that. What were you thinking? Imposter syndrome. It's the inner critic is kind of a topic that is an umbrella that holds what we've found to have like 9 different angles to it. There's the perfectionist and there's the controller and there's the avoider and I could go down the list. We all have ways in which our inner critic shows up. That's the one that wants to judge us. But then also we have survival strategies of how we get in our own way. And when most people come to me, it's because they have either just a vague feeling that something wants to be born from them, or this feeling is constantly there and they've attempted to feed it and express it and lived into it. And something always gets in the way. And the thing that always gets in our way is what we call in our world the antagonist, the saboteur. And why I love that work is because we bring it conscious so that you can hear the voice clearer. We give you some techniques to work with that. And and really embolden people and arm people with tools to work with these parts, because these parts aren't going away, you guys. That's the other thing. We all think, oh, if I just get my inner critic to settle down or make it disappear or blow it up, then I'll finally get to write my novel, or then I'll finally get to ask that person out on a date. Or then, so it's like a when-then kind of life. When I do this, then I'll do that. And then we wake up and we're 70 years old and we're like, oh shit, I never did any of that, because the inner critic's always going to be there. So it's about befriending it in some ways, getting that it's just a little protector part of us, just wants to protect us, wants to keep us safe, is afraid of everything. And to let it know that, you know what, it's okay. It's okay to be messy. It's okay to not know. It's okay to experiment. It's okay to be awkward. None of us, we all think that we're supposed to be perfect. And yet when we look out in the world, why we love each other is because we're all so unique and so different and dented in our own beautiful way. So why can't we be dented in our own beautiful way too? I love shadow work because it is the thing that frees me. It frees me because it reminds me that I am all the things. I am filled with all the parts of what it means to be human. I feel all the feelings. I can entertain all the ideas. Doesn't mean I act on all of them, but that I understand that if I'm a human, I have all of these human traits within me. So I have a few questions for you, or some prompts for you to help you look inside of yourself, to start to get to know your shadow self. I don't know what I want to call this segment of our time together, but I'll come up with something. But I do have a couple of questions for you. So you might want to pause this, go get your journal, go get a piece of paper, and listen to this part of the podcast when you've got a little time to maybe sit down and be with yourself. Or, hey, maybe you're on a walk or driving your car and you let your mind wander a little bit while you think about these things. So here are 3 or 4 questions you can ask yourself and start to write about. And I really invite you to, if you are sitting and writing, or if you're driving or walking, to just kind of let yourself free associate. Don't come up with the right answer. Let your mind just kind of babble on a little bit, because that'll be the freedom you'll have to reveal some things to yourself. You don't have to do this perfectly. You don't have to look perfect. That's the whole point of shadow work, right? It's to kind of dig around the edges. So my first question is, this is the question we always ask people to kind of help them get in touch with their shadow to begin with. What quality or qualities do you dislike most in other people? So let yourself take a few moments, pause the taping, pause the recording here, listening, and let yourself just free associate. What qualities do you dislike most in other people? Second prompt. What quality or qualities do you most admire in someone you look up to or revere? What is it about them that makes you look up to them, maybe even want to be them? And so here comes the fun part. So you get a list of traits, qualities that you don't like, that you dislike in other people, a list of qualities or traits about the things you admire in other people. You're going to have these lists. Maybe you have 6, 10, 12, I don't know how many things you have between the two of them. And here's the third part of the process. If you were to allow yourself to own that aspect, whether it's negative or positive, if you were able to own that part of you, what would you have to admit to? What would you get to embrace that you normally don't get to embrace? How might it free you in some part of your life? This is the cool thing about shadow work, that when we meet these parts of ourselves and befriend them, we become freer because we occupy more space within ourselves. We allow more space to be open and occupied inside our interior life. And it makes the world outside of us seem freer and bigger too. You know, I remember when my dad died, one of the things that hit me was this phrase kept coming into my mind, which was, I think there was a commercial at the time or something, advertisement, which was, you know, you are now free to roam the planet at will. There was this sense of like the world was suddenly bigger for me because I, even myself, was just stepping out of the shadow, a shadow I didn't even know I was in. I didn't realize how much I had compartmentalized myself when my dad was alive. I was just Kelly, just living my life. I didn't realize that being his daughter, actually, until he died, had relegated me to the backstage of my own life. And so for all of you, I invite all of you to take a step from the wings of the theater, watching the other people on the stage, to take a step towards center stage, where the light is, where your center stage is, where your light is, so that we can all see you, that you can see yourself, and that we can take in whatever it is that you are here to live into, express, share, and be. All right. Have a great day. Talk to you soon. Be well.